Good morning. I'm Fenwick Huss, Willem Kooyker Dean of the Zicklin School of Business, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. Joining me today from the Dean's office is Gwen Webb, Associate Dean, who will moderate the question and answer period. In this series of webinars, we're exploring the new normal, and today's conversation is around what's on the horizon of international relations. To lead our conversation, we have Willem Kooyker, founder of Blenheim Capital, an alum of the school, a supporter of the school, and a member of our advisory council. Also with us is Noel Lateef, who's the CEO and president of the Foreign Policy Association here in New York. He is also an adjunct professor in our honors program in the Zicklin School of Business. Noel?
Thank you, Fenwick. It's a pleasure to join you today and to join Wim, who I have admired for many years. Wim has has presented in my class at Baruch, and I've always said that we should tape his pearls of wisdom. So let me begin by saying that it's been said that there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. Are we witnessing in the COVID-19 crisis such a history-accelerating event? Does world order hang in the balance? Is this pandemic a wake-up call? John Micklethwait, former editor-in-chief of The Economist, seems to think so. He says, if Western governments respond creatively to the crisis, they will have a chance of reversing decades of decline. If they dither and delay while Asia ascends, the prospects of a new Eastern-dominated world order will grow. Kevin Rudd, the former Australian Prime Minister and an astute observer of US-China relations, warned in Foreign Affairs last week of the coming post-COVID anarchy in world order. In his words, the result will be a continued slow but steady drift toward international anarchy across everything from international security to trade to pandemic management. With nobody directing traffic, various forms of rampant nationalism are taking the place of order and cooperation. The chaotic nature of national and global responses to the pandemic thus stands as a warning of what could come on an even broader scale. Wim, how do you see US-China relations evolving post-COVID-19? Do you subscribe to Kevin Rudd's view that we are at risk of an increasingly dysfunctional and chaotic world? Could the 2020s look like a mindless return of the 1930s?
Thanks, Noel. That is going to be a hard question to answer for the simple reason that I know Kevin Rudd from being on the board of the Asia Society, and I know his past of Prime Minister from Australia, as well as a fluent speaker in Mandarin. And he knows China inside out, upside down. So for him to express that thought, we cannot ignore that, and we will definitely, we as the world and his connections that he has, we should listen very carefully, because that's clearly the direction that we should not be going. I'm an optimist by nature. I think Kevin also is an optimist by nature, so that's what makes it even more serious that he is this pessimistic. I would like to believe, and let me state up front that by nature I am an optimistic person. Having been in commodity trading for 50 years, you have to be, because otherwise you go insane. But I would like to believe, I remember as a teenager when the European Union was started. and the participants who were then initiating, the main speakers, had gone through the war and had gone through 2 wars. And Europe having had literally 200-300 years of fighting each other. And I remember the main theme, I still remember it vividly. I was just a young teenager. The main reason for they finally getting together, that they said, we have had enough, basically, after all the disasters that have happened. We should not proceed. And that was with the help of the United States and the Marshall Plan. It pushed us in the right direction. I would hope that after the pandemic, that significant changes will take place, but positive ones. But that requires a different mindset than what we had coming into the Corona period. It is usually these things don't just happen by accident. They kind of build up over a period of time. It's like an underwater volcano. It takes a while before it comes to the surface. But I sincerely hope that more saner minds will prevail. That requires, without going into political details, some government leadership changes, because what is going on currently, really, between the United States and China is like 2 young boys in the sandbox fighting for a little bit more sand and take it away from the others. It's almost infantile, except that it is done on a mega scale. It's clearly stands to lose. Both parties are significant in potential significant setbacks, much worse than what we have seen. And I sincerely hope that doesn't happen. I'm encouraged. I read very carefully, and they just digress to a little bit on the side here what's happening in Europe, which has been the weak bloc in the last couple of years between China and the United States. There, between Merkel and Macron, they are going in the right direction. They're trying to unify Europe for the first time under a fiscal side of the structure, rather than just the monetary, which should have been done a lot sooner. But finally, it's gotten around that it is at least now in the talking stage and has a decent chance to succeed. That would be a good example of how the direction should be, that the world should be going. Closing things down, pulling away from WHO, not participating in the United Nations. No. You need to bring about some corrections. And fighting with each other, particularly to the 2 power countries, is a regimen, is a recipe rather for disaster going forward. And I think that is uncalled for. So we need a change. That is the change that will have to come about because of the pandemic. That we have that we have an open-mindedness and be a little bit more sensitive to where each party comes from psychologically. We all have our reasons why we think the way we do, and there is a certain element of competition, like today's address is taking into consideration. But competition and cooperation do go hand in hand if it is done in a sensible way, and that is what I personally hope for. Because otherwise, the alternative is really unacceptable. As a trader, I always think in terms of upside and downside and the probabilities of each. Right now, the upside is so much more positive than the downside. The downside should not even be considered because it may, at this particular moment, even have a higher probability of taking place. But I refuse to accept that yet. Not yet. I think that the upside, that's the direction we go over the next 20 years, would look very, very, very good. And if it is done with some semblance, such as Europe helping with a corona recovery fund, we helping at the UN level or at a macro level, then the payback, I think, would be phenomenal. But we would have to see also a change in leadership that is a lot more open-minded. And I'm talking about both. I don't think that we can all blame Trump or we can blame Xi Jinping. Both, this takes two to tango, and both have to have a different record. But our fear currently of China is a major force, and that is then returned by them, which is a short sight. And that is what Kevin, no doubt, is referring to. He is worried. I have not spoken to him at all about this, but he is worried about that. And he knows China. He knows the inside out of China. And so I'm concerned that he feels that way. I'd love to talk to him about it. As a matter of fact, when I get around to it, I hope to get hold of him, talk about that very issue. But I hope not, because the upside is so much better, and the odds are so much better for us having a better world. But then nationalism has got to be pressed down, which Europe is now trying to do, and that has to be done on a grander scale. Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned Europe, and Angela Merkel's Germany will take over the rotating EU presidency in the second half of 2020. What course do you think Germany will steer for European integration and for transatlantic relations?
Well, speaking, since I grew up in Europe, I know a lot of people there, and I speak to them routinely, frequently. There is no doubt that the mood of Europe and individual countries towards the United States has definitely become more negative. And that's putting it very, very euphemistically. I'm sad about that because, the start after World War II, Europe is a lot to be grateful for the Marshall Plan. But like anything like that, when you help on that grander scale, both parties become addicted to the benefits of it. One is the benefit, more power and more control over that particular region. That would be the United States. And for Europe, it's nice, you don't have to spend a lot of money on the army, and you can use that to build yourself up economically. And Europe has allowed that to continue because the United States wanted to continue too. But the United States pumped several $billions a year into the so-called NATO. And I say so-called. A friend of mine wrote a book years ago, at least 20 years ago, called, and I totally agreed with it, and being from Europe, it's even then I totally agreed with it, how NATO weakens the West, that Europe basically became too dependent, psychologically dependent, and grinning ear to ear for the financials that they were benefiting from. But if that happens for too long, one tends to take it for granted, and that's wrong. And the United States should have addressed that issue as with Europe sooner. That should not have happened. So that's one of the reasons that, of course, Trump has referred to, that they need to do more, and rightly so. But all these things can be addressed in a somewhat more cordial fashion, rather than this is the way and this is my way and that's the only way, because that is not negotiating. That's not true. That's never true. And unfortunately, threatening and bullying tactics that may be working in the New York City real estate market, but on the world market, that just simply doesn't work at all. So there again, these changes we would have to have. But I think if we do get them, and I sincerely hope, Germany obviously has benefited tremendously of having had a strong currency in a climate of weak partners. So if Germany would have been outside the European Union, the Deutschmark would have been a lot higher than what the euro has been for them. So they benefited, but and they having had the history from 1923 onwards, I can understand completely where they come from, and that things were written in stone in the constitution, and it's hard to persuade them of this. The way that Merkel has come up with is really fabulous. It's been in the oven, I'm sure, for a long time, but it is an indirect way to achieve rather than rubbing it in, because that would not pass the German public, nor would it pass the Constitution and the Supreme Court. But this is an indirect way that 500 billion euro is financed by the budget of the euro, meaning the Euro Commission. So it's not a national; it's a euro fund, but you know they're going to raise the budget, the contribution probably by 0.5%. And that's how it is going to be financed. So it's an indirect way. I hope it succeeds, because a stronger Europe would be able to play politically a more important role, and that would benefit the relationship, the forthcoming relationship between China and the US. Because we clearly, carrying on the way we are now, that would lead, unfortunately, to the road that Kevin predicts.
Thank you, Wim. I think it's fair to say that a robust global economic recovery will require global cooperation, not isolation, and that it will also require what might be called sustainable globalization. Multilateral organizations like the IMF and the World Bank will have a particularly important role, it seems to me, in diffusing a potential crisis in emerging markets. Argentina is on the brink of default. They were going to declare default last week, but they postponed to May 22nd to negotiate with their creditors. In many ways, they are the poster child of what's going on in emerging markets. With the COVID-19 crisis, you have a perfect storm. You are a longtime investor in Brazil. How do you appraise the situation there?
Oh, this is, as we say in Holland, now I'm about to start skating on very thin ice. And you could fall through that very quickly. I have been involved and then going to Brazil since 1967. And I have done a lot of business with Brazil in commodities, obviously. I was working at the time and for a long time for a commodity trading firm. And so I've traded commodities. And Brazil, of course, is very big in particularly the agricultural commodities, but also in iron ore and gold and several of the other. So it's a prime country, and it's extraordinarily rich. The Brazilian culture is a wonderful culture. It's very upbeat, almost excessively so, and any Brazilian will make a joke with you, say that God is a Brazilian, and that was until there was an Argentinian Pope. They had to somewhat change their thinking, but it's an upbeat population, but they have had a habit of, and they blame the Portuguese occupation for that, which of course is quite a few years ago. Of how the leadership is chosen, and the quality of the leadership over the years has left a great deal to be desired. And because there is no reason, Brazil mainland is the same size as the US mainland without Alaska and Hawaii. So that goes to show you the size of that and the incredible wealth. And that's why China very much wants to be close to Brazil. I remember traveling to China, and I would always get the questions about the agricultural situation in Brazil, particularly of the grains. And but they are major producers of several commodities. And unfortunately, each country picks its own leadership, and they have been very unfortunate in picking the right leadership. Unfortunately, there is also, over the years, there's a fair amount of corruption that was addressed significantly during the Lava Jato with Sergio Moro, when more than 120 politicians wound up behind bars. So that was a good start. There was an upbeat feeling in Brazil when that happened, and that unfortunately didn't last because of the current president has the unfortunate habit of speaking too much and using words and indications of the future that are being recorded as very negative. Fortunately, he has a very good finance minister, Queiroz. I have seen and heard his speeches on several occasions. He is fantastic, American educated, so I feel good. He has tried to tackle several issues that are highly necessary, and he has made some progress, but it's too slow for my liking. Now, of course, under Bolsonaro's words, the situation of Corona is expanding rapidly. They're now the third largest in infections as well as death, and that is unheard of, and that's not the right attitude from the top. So I'm very concerned about it. I have investments in Brazil. Bolsonaro has another 3 years to go on his term, so it's unless the Brazilian people get fed up, they could do the same thing with him as they did with Dilma Rousseff, but that doesn't look like that yet. So it's going to be a tension-filled period for them, which is sad because that means another delay again, and this year is going to be a big down year. And they are upbeat, thinking that next year will be a plus, but I reserve judgment on that for now until I see how the Corona situation evolves.
Can we turn to the U.S. economy? The strength of the U.S. domestically is the source of U.S. power. What is your take on the U.S. economy post-COVID? The fiscal intervention so far amounts to 10% of GDP, pushing the U.S. ratio of public debt to GDP toward 100%, near the wartime record of 106%. Do you see a V-shaped recovery in the cards?
That I find very hard to accept at this particular moment. I grew up in an environment. I left Holland when I was 21, but I grew up in an environment where debt was a dirty word, and in the family as well as in the country, and it still is. And Holland is the leader of the frugal five, and so the DNA where I come from is very much towards discipline, financial discipline, and also there is such a thing as overdoing a good thing. You may be doing it because it's the right thing to do at a certain moment, but the more you treat people well and you do it with gifts, that after 11 years, certain things you become so ingrained and you take for granted And if you don't get it anymore, you have an adverse reaction to that. And I'm very concerned about that here. I've lived here for a long, long time. I love the United States, but I'm very concerned that with that kind of money that is currently being thrown around, it is indeed literally helicopter money. And we like to and have gotten used to, I'm afraid, to what became known on the Greenspan as the Greenspan put, that the stock market could never go down because Greenspan would make sure that it would be stopped. That became the Greenspan put. We have definitely right now accepted psychologically that there is a put, that whenever something goes wrong, that there will be a bailout by the Federal Reserve, and in this particular case, also by the federal government and fiscal money. And that is, if you have a put and you keep believing that it is there, you change your behavior. You become more risk acceptance because you will be bailed out. And we have seen that now in 2008 and 10, and we are seeing it again today. A lot of the big money has gone to the big companies. So unfortunately, you gravitate them towards size rather than profitability. Now, you know, the tech arm of the stock market has done, of course, extremely well. They're all entrepreneurs. And that is something that we at all times should be considering. But if you keep throwing money to the corporations, like we are now doing, and we did in 2008 also, you basically, in a capitalistic country, it's kind of ironic because we now wind up with investments potentially in the corporate world, and that is not pure capitalism anymore. Capitalism / more risk-taking means that sometimes you lose money. And you should not be believing constantly that you're going to get bailed out by the government. Every so often there is a price to be paid, and if that is in the background, you have to learn to live with the thought of upside and downside. That has been my motto for years. And the sign of probability is obviously very subjective, but what is the upside versus the downside? And if you assume that there is only upside, and you have had an upside in the stock market of 11 and 12 years, that becomes part of your DNA almost. I mean, so there's a lot of people right now who are in these markets and have never seen a serious setback until the one that just happened. But the comeback from that has been very quick. Do I believe in the V? I give that not as a zero probability, because, you know, we are lining up more trillions of dollars than I've ever seen in my life. But believing as I do from the background that I come from, so I have that bias. If you keep throwing money at it, that does not necessarily mean that it's going to help. You need also a psychological change as to what you did, because the money we threw in 2008 and 10 till now hasn't really helped a lot of people. It has helped a small percentage of the population, but not as much the people at large. And that, and the spread that you now see between basically the average company in GDP vis-a-vis the top, that spread is getting wider and wider and wider. And that is an unsustainable situation. That is that could last another year, could last another 2 years, like when the bull market had gone on for 10 years, several of us were thinking already and speaking like, my God, you know, this is one of these days is going to come to an end, but it didn't. It lasted another one, and then we got the nasty corona. Just a reminder that life is not always smooth, and the put cannot always be put in place in time. The fact that we didn't anticipate more, we had an anticipating department in the WHO under Obama, which was discontinued, but clearly going forward, we need to we really need more cooperation together, but amongst countries. It's crazy that there are 200 laboratories working on a vaccine. That should be much more coordinated, and then that would increase the speed. It's if the 200 laboratories do not necessarily mean that it's faster, because you don't put all the talent together. And the atomic bomb was built by a very small group of people, and they didn't have 200 laboratories to do it. You had just a few people. So but in this particular case, nationalism, I'm vehemently opposed to nationalism. That leads eventually to things that we saw in the 30s when we didn't cooperate, and Woodrow Wilson tried and failed to get an equivalent of a UN. But if nationalism falls under the wrong leadership, and we have some, shall we say, some very strange, quote unquote, euphemistically leadership right now. If we have, we've seen a tendency towards dictatorship. I mean, or declaring yourself the sole ruler of the country for life. Well, that is obviously completely the wrong thing to do, because time and again, historically, that has failed. And but in a nutshell, I don't think it'll be a V. It may be a W even. And it's a sine qua non that we had a difference in attitude. We should continue to focus on teaching more understanding of other cultures, and that should start at a very early age. I mean, when I went to elementary school in the 5th grade, they started teaching us French all the way through lycée, the 4 languages. The earlier you start, and you have a better understanding of other cultures, the less likely you're going to have wars. And now gravitating towards bringing industries back, that goes against Ricardo. Well, that's not taking advantage of his theories, and it becomes a form. It could threaten to be a form of mercantilism, like the French did, and that was a hopeless failure too. So don't do that. You need to continue to interact, but also with a portfolio attitude. In other words, do not buy the absolute necessity that you have that could stall your own economy and buy it from only one place. That's not a good portfolio theory. But doing business together, I'm all in favor of that. And the more international trade we have and the more diversified we are, the better it is for the world.
Thank you, Wim. Let's turn to the audience and take some questions from the audience.
Hi, I'll get this started. First, thank you both for a very, very insightful discussion. We do have quite a few questions here. The first one I'd like to pose deals with competition and cooperation, the fundamental themes of this session. Carlos dos Santos, the ambassador from the Republic of Mozambique to the US, has posed this. Competition and cooperation are imperative, not an option for the post-COVID-19 era. They're certainly not mutually exclusive. Therefore, shouldn't the question be what kind of competition and what kind of cooperation do we need going forward? And he adds, multilateralism may gain new ground, for the COVID-19 revealed not only the relevance and importance of the World Health Organization, but highlighted our interdependence and the need to share knowledge, capacities, doctors, ventilators, protecting oneself to protect all. Can you comment on this perspective?
I'll get started and just say that I think that's an excellent question. And when we look back at the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, there was extraordinary cooperation, particularly at the level of the G20, where everyone agreed to work together. And we don't have an arrangement where these countries have even agreed to work together on trying to find antivirals and a vaccine. So I think that you can have competition, but still have cooperation. And this is something that's been brought out in a very interesting essay by Elizabeth Economy, who is writing this essay for a special edition of the Foreign Policy Association's flagship publication, Great Decisions, being released this summer. And she underscores that the COVID-19 pandemic brings out the necessity of continued US engagement with China. As she puts it, global threats and crises require global coordinated action. And whether on pandemics or climate change, cooperation will be a condition of success. Do you want to add something, Ben?
Yes, please. I think it is a key point that is brought up here, because on the face of it, you say competition and cooperation. That's an oxymoron. That they can't go together in the same sentence. And I believe that with the right attitude, they go very well together. The one extreme is when you hear things like America first. That doesn't leave much negotiating room for the other parties. If they start off that America is first, in other words, is always the winner, that doesn't show cooperative efforts. So that is not cooperation. Being competitive is very important, because competitive, again, if you're an entrepreneur, you have to be competitive to succeed. So I think that is very important, to be competitive. But it should not be at the expense of cooperation, because then you're diluting the effort of competition. Again, like I said earlier, if you have a great idea, there may be somebody else who could fine tune that, and out of the two or three of you working together, again with the right attitude. If you have an attitude that you want to be first, and that compromise, that's a very, very difficult thing in our current climate here, at the domestic level and at the international level. When you pull out of WHO, and you pull out of all the other things that we have pulled out, is too many to mention. That is not cooperation, and pure competition. Pure competition is just as extreme as pure cooperation. There is no such a thing as purity on those two topics. You have to be together on that, and with the right attitude, you get tremendous results.
Thank you both. I have another question here from Kent Jones, professor of economics from Babson College. As a professor of economics, he says, I have studied the global trading system for most of my career. Increasing anti-globalization sentiment, Donald Trump, and now COVID-19 threatened the global economy with proposals to reshore supply chains, close borders to goods, services, and people, and resurrect economic nationalism around the world. Given the gains from trade, what can be done to prevent this sort of regression?
You want me to start on that, Noel?
Well, let me give it a stab, and then I'll have you correct me.
No. I hope. No. What I said, enhance it.
I think that the private sector has a very important role to play. Apple, for example, has been an important interlocutor between Beijing and Washington. And I recall very vividly that when we had the Russian Federation foreign minister come and speak to us at the Foreign Policy Association, Sergei Lavrov, that he lamented that we did not have more trade between the United States and Russia. And he actually pointed to the amount of trade that exists between China and the United States. So I think Professor Jones raises a very important point, and one that both at the private sector level, but also at the public sector level, we have to be really mindful of the importance of trade to a peaceful world.
Well, we certainly have the evidence, the historical evidence, that international trade is extraordinarily beneficial to all the countries who participate in that. The numbers are out there for hundreds of years. As a matter of fact, this little country, Holland, became very, very, very wealthy on international trade. You know, they had a profit margin of 3,000% on nutmegs. And that goes to show you in a minuscule way and how much money each country can make and benefit under international trade. So I'm as strong, having grown up in that world from the tender age of 21, I am such a solid supporter of that. I'm a globalist, absolutely, without any question of a doubt. That is, we have to, because international trade also teaches you, if you try to superimpose your attitudes on a country, eventually that fails. That is, you get thrown out, as the Chinese are about to discover. And once you were a colonial power, you got steadily thrown out because that is not what people want. But international trade, each one is a winner. And whereas if one person is the winner, that's not sustainable. But if in international trade and you can have companies. You don't have a pull a company into your own country and get the benefit of it. It's because companies can be totally nationalistic because they only sell national topics or services. Then there is the international one, and that does a lot of international business. And then there is the one that has international locations, offices in 25 different countries. Each one has a slightly different approach, but they are definitely helping the world economy. And the moment which is why my reaction to Trump's slapping tariffs on was like I shook my head and I thought, oh my God, the American people are going to pay for this because tariffs are always paid for by the domestic population. The Chinese didn't pay those, we paid for them. And it made things more expensive. Not working together, if you do not really push international trade, your prices will go up in your own country.
Thank you both. Here's a question from the floor. It's from Professor Myung-Soo Lee at Baruch. With the current nationalistic mood prevalent in the US under the Trump administration, there is a chance to block international students coming to the States, particularly from China. Can we afford not having a constant flow of international intellectuals who contribute to R&D and scientific discoveries we need now more than ever to solve the challenging problems during the current pandemic? Any thoughts, he asks?
Yeah, I would like to start on this one because there's a great example for that currently in effect. And the positive fallout and consequences. Having international students is extraordinarily important because you teach them your way of doing things, and vice versa. We learn from foreign students. I mean, I've been involved in mentoring for 30 years, and the mentor-mentee relationship goes both ways. The mentee learns from the mentor, and the mentor learns from the mentee. Same with international students. I mean, I'm an immigrant, and I learned an awful lot because I grew up in a Calvinistic country, but also very much entrepreneurial. I come here, and over the 50 years, I've learned a lot. But what is even more important, there's an example that in Germany, foreign students, I have done some work together with one big university in Germany. Education in Germany is just about for free. In Holland, it's almost free. Everybody pays a little bit, but it's essentially for free. But they also allow foreign students to come in, provided they meet the admission standards. And they have, over the years, taught a lot of Chinese students. They encourage that. And why? Germany is a big exporter, very big exporter. Guess which country is one of the biggest clients? China. Because the Chinese students who studied for free in Germany go back to China, climb up in an organization and say, wait a minute, yeah, when I was in Germany, that and that and that. So China is buying a lot of German products, as you can see now, how they are hurting with the results of Corona and these fights. But that is a longer term strategy. Even we say, well, we teach them here and they go back. Well, yeah, they go back, but hey, they may rise in the hierarchy. They become a significant politician. Take, for instance, the example of Queiroz. Queiroz lived in the United States, got a degree from Chicago, finance minister of Brazil, and is using some of the knowledge that he got here and apply it now to the changing the financial perimeters of Brazil, and has come up with some good ideas and keeps pushing. There's an example of where the benefit of having studied here is applied over there, improving the chances of Brazil and the United States working more closely together, which they want to very, very, very much. As a matter of fact, Queiroz states unequivocally when you meet him, he hopes that one of the reasons that he thinks is a success would be if the United States and Brazil start working together much more closely than they've ever been in the past. And that's another example. So yes, I am strongly in favor of foreign students studying in the United States.
Let me just add that I think it bears remembering that between 2000 and 2017, immigrants to the United States won 38% of Nobel Peace Prizes in medicine, physics, and chemistry.
We don't have a lot more time. There are a lot of questions here, but let me ask each of you the following. And this is for each of you. Can each of you tell us what gives you hope for the future for America and America's role in the world?
I'll get started here. I think that American democracy can and should be an example to the world. And one of the most important features of democracy is its capacity for self-correction and for renewal. So I have great hope that we will continue to play an important role in the world, and that we will engage with other democracies around the world.
And Wim?
Well, of course I agree with that, but it takes two to tango. And that means both parties, in order to be successful, have to have the right attitude. And at this particular moment, we don't have the right attitude. As I said in the beginning, America first doesn't induce other people to say, well, wait a minute, let me negotiate with him, because beforehand I know I'm going to lose, and I can go home beforehand knowing that I'm going to lose because he wants to be America first. The capitalism in its purest form is not necessarily the best way to proceed. I know I cannot use the word socialism because that is a dirty word, but in effect, what we're doing right now, these are socialistic steps that the government is taking, that the Federal Reserve is taking. Okay, that's the irony, that we are in a highly competitive world and a capitalistic environment. But thank you very much, government. I need $10 trillion. I need $25 billion to keep my planes flying. You know, when I just spent $45 billion to buy my own stock back, you know, that is a form of socialism. Now, I don't want to go there because I in the pure form of socialism is also incorrect. You get to Venezuela and you get to some of this, and God forbid, eventually communism. None of that. The Dutch have discovered a much nicer name for it. The Dutch, and it came up years ago when we had a speaker here right after Sandy, when Manhattan was flooded, to discuss what system we should build for to protect ourselves. And he said, "Well, you have to do it together. New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey." Why? You know, I mean, somebody stood up and said to him, "Well, sir, is that not socialism?" And he said, "No, it's called social mindedness. You should mind your neighbors, because if your neighbor changes the current of the ocean and it floods your country, that is not benefiting anybody because you get ticked off at your neighbor." And in Holland, we have that feeling because we have a common enemy called the ocean. 1953, we were flooded and more than 2,000 people drowned. And so there's 17 million people in Holland. 65% of that lives below sea level by 25 feet. So we need to keep these dikes everywhere in good shape. This is an illustration of how important it is to work together. And yeah, you have a social responsibility, because in the earlier days, several hundred years ago, the king and queen were way at the top, rich and living in grand splendor. And then suddenly you had a revolution and they were marched off to the guillotine. And they were surprised. What have we done? Well, the spread became too wide. That was no longer social minded. Social mindedness means taking in mind, taking care, thinking about the people you live with, because if you spread too far out, it will eventually undermine you. And that's not socialism, that's social mindedness.
Thank you both very much. I'm sorry we don't have time for more questions. There are quite a few that I'll share with both of you later. But for the audience, thank you also. Please save June 9 and June 17, also at 11 in the morning, for upcoming webinars. Dean Huss and Larry Zicklin will be talking with Zicklin alumni Lara Abrash, Chair and CEO of Deloitte & Touche, and Michael Roth, Chairman and CEO of the Interpublic Group. I'll hand back to you, Noel.
Well, thank you, Gwen. It's been said that we confer meaning upon the world by the courage of our questions and by the depth of our answers. By this caliper, I could not be more grateful to you, Wim, for your answers, and to our audience for your questions. Many thanks to Dean Fenwick Huss, Gwen Webb, Laura Jewell. Let me conclude by recommending a book. It's Frank Snowden's book, Epidemics and Society. Snowden, who teaches the history of medicine at Yale, observes that of all the conditions that promote virulent disease, hubris emerges across the centuries as a prime mover. Napoleon's expansionist dreams were ultimately defeated not by the collective will of rival generals, but by his inability to predict or contain the spread of infections in his armies. I would conclude by saying that we cannot overlook the fact that viruses and bacterial pathogens do not recognize international boundaries. Global cooperation, therefore, is in our collective national interest, and it is our best protection against future emerging diseases. Thank you.